Hello everyone. Our today's presentation topic is The Myth of Asia's Miracle by Team 7. Myself Parminder Kaur, and I will start with the brief introduction about the topic and then my colleagues will be discussing it further. Before starting the topic, I would like to talk a bit about the author. The author for this article is Paul Krugman. He's an American economist. He's a distinguished professor of economics at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He's also a columnist for the New York Times. And in 2008, Krugman was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for his contributions to new trade theory and new economic geography. Now I will begin with the article. Author in the article throws cold water on the enthusiasm about Asia's economy boom to most economists. The author focuses on Asian countries' economical development and has explained the process that countries passed during those developments. Starting with 1960s, Western countries faced challenges of Eastern significant growth. 8 countries in East Asia, those were Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia, have become known as the East Asian Miracle. It was because of their dramatic growth in economies. Western opinion leaders found themselves both impressed and frightened by the extraordinary growth rates achieved by a set of Eastern economies, although those economies were still substantially poorer and smaller than those of the West. The speed with which they had transformed themselves from peasant societies into industrial powerhouses, their continuing ability to achieve growth rates several times higher than the advanced nations, and their increasing ability to challenge or even surpass American and European technology in certain areas seemed to call into question the dominance not only of Western power but of Western ideology. The author also focuses on how the economic growth should be assessed. There are two aspects which needs to be seriously considered. One, the increase in inputs, and those are expansion of employment, increases in education levels, and above all, massive investment in physical capital. And second, increases in the output per unit of input, which is called efficiency. In the article, author also compares Soviet Union to other Asian countries, which infer Asian growth seems to be driven by extraordinary growth in inputs rather than by gains in efficiency. He argued that once those inputs were taken into account, the growth in output was unsurprising. Or, to put it differently, the big surprise about Soviet growth was that, when closely examined, it posed no mystery. Now we will discuss the process of development in Soviet Union's and Asia's economy. The graph shows that Soviet Union's and Asia's economy grew exponentially. And while focusing on growth, the author argued that in Eastern Europe and Asian countries, the economic growth achieved purely through mobilization of resources rather than real productivity. He predicted that growth would continue but at a slower pace. In sum, the article states that these Asian tigers were subject to the law of diminishing returns. This growth will be slowed down in the last because of countries' ability to mobilize resources but not use them efficiently, and the basis of input driven are not the real economy prosperity. Now we will talk about the Soviet growth. The Soviet Empire in UN podium declared that we will bury you. It was an economic rather than a military boast. The statement became a topic of discussion, and in article by Calvin B. Hoover, like many other Western economists, Hoover also criticized official Soviet statistics, arguing that they exaggerated the true growth rate. Nonetheless, he concluded that Soviet claims of astonishing achievement were fully justified. Their economy was achieving a rate of growth that too twice as high as that attained by any important capitalistic country over any considerable number of years, and 3 times as high as the average annual rate of increase in the United States. He concluded that it was probable that a collectivist state was inherently better at achieving economic growth than free market democracies, and projected that the Soviet economy might outstrip that of the United States by the early 1970s. And the reasons behind their rapid growth was willingness to save, willingness to sacrifice current consumption for the sake of the future production, and a focused increase in inputs, which means expansion of employment, increase in education levels, and massive investment in physical capital. From the graph, we can see that Soviet GDP grew exponentially. The general image of Soviet central planning was that it might be brutal and might not do a very good job of providing consumer goods, but that it was very effective at promoting industrial growth. The author in the article also has focused on Soviet slowdown and its reasons. In the above parts, we have discussed that the Soviet growth was due to rapid growth in inputs. Their planners had moved millions of workers from farms to cities, incorporated women into labor force. Men worked longer hours and pursued massive education programs. Soviet Union's strength and ability was to mobilize resources effectively, but that too by adopting Western technologies, but not its ability to use them efficiently. It was obvious to everyone that the Soviet Union in 1960 was much less efficient than the United States. Also, the input-driven growth is an inherently limited process. Soviet growth was virtually certain to slow down. When economists began to study the growth of the Soviet economy, they expected to find that rapid Soviet growth reflected both rapid input growth and rapid growth in efficiency. But what they found was that Soviet growth was based on rapid growth in inputs only. It was understood that the rate of efficiency growth was not only unspectacular, but it was also well below the rates achieved in Western economies. Long before the slowing of Soviet growth became so obvious, it was predicted on the basis of growth accounting by some economists. Now we will discuss on growth accounting. Author in the article explains that economic expansion represents the sum of two sources of growth. On one side are increases in inputs, which we discussed above in slide number 2, that those are growth in employment, in the education level of workers, and in the stock of physical capital, which are machines, buildings, roads, and so on. On the other side are increases in the output per unit of input. Such increases may result from better management or better economic policy. The author in the article has focused on the importance of growth accounting, and the equation can be capital growth plus labor growth plus technological progress. It's required to understand how much growth is due to each input and how much is due to increased efficiency. Increases in labor productivity, however, are not always caused by the increased efficiency of workers. Labor is only one of a number of inputs. Workers may produce more, not because they are better managed or have more technological knowledge, but simply because they have better machinery. For example, a man with a bulldozer can dig a ditch faster than one with only a shovel, but he is not more efficient. He just has more capital to work with. The aim of growth accounting is to produce an index that combines all measurable inputs and to measure the rate of growth of national income relative to that index to estimate that which is known as total factor productivity. As soon as one starts to think in terms of growth accounting, however, one arrives at a crucial insight about the process of economic growth. Sustained growth in a nation's per capita income can only occur if there is a rise in output per unit of input. Mere increases in inputs without an increase in the efficiency with which those inputs are used, investing in more machinery and infrastructure, must run into diminishing returns. Input-driven growth is inevitably limited. Now my colleague will take over from here.
Hey everyone, my name is Faiz. I'm just gonna continue where Parminder left off, and I'm gonna start off with the Asian tigers. So, the Asian tigers are the collective economies of South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Between the early 1960s and 1990s, they underwent rapid industrialization and maintained exceptionally high growth rates of more than 7% a year. All four of these economies have been fueled by exports and rapid industrialization. They have achieved high levels of economic growth since the 1960s, benefiting mostly from the end of colonialism and the need of a strong Asian hub in the rise of globalization around the world. In the early 1960s, the global economy was just starting to recover after the traumas of the Second World War and the Korean War of the 1950s. Tentative world peace combined with major advances in air travel and telecommunications meant that borders were opening up around the world, and the four tigers were perfectly positioned to benefit. All four countries boasted long-established ports and developed trade economies, highly educated populations, as well as robust post-colonial infrastructure, mainly as a result of the British influence in Hong Kong and Singapore, the Chinese influence in Taiwan, and the Americans in South Korea. The four Tiger governments took this opportunity to invest heavily in industrialization, building major industrial estates, offering tax incentives to foreign investors, and implementing compulsory education for its young population in order to secure the future of the workforce. These economic developments took hold so quickly that, in addition to being named the Asian tigers, they were also known as the Asian miracle, attracting even more international interest and investment. Singapore. Between 1966 and 1990, the Singaporean economy grew a remarkable 8.5% per annum, three times as fast as the United States. The per capita income grew at 6.6% rate, roughly doubling every decade. This achievement seemed to be kind of economic miracle, but the miracle turns out to be have been based on a perspiration rather than an inspiration. Singapore grew through a mobilization of resources that would have done Stalin proud, as per Krugman. The employed share of the population surged from 27 to 51%. The educational standards of that workforce were dramatically upgraded. In 1966, more than half the workers had no formal education at all, but by the 1990s, two-thirds had completed secondary education. Above all, the country had made an enormous investment in physical capital. Investment as a share of output rose from 11 to more than 40%. Even without going through the exercise of growth accounting, these numbers should make it obvious that Singapore's growth has been based largely on one-time changes in behavior that might not be replicated. Over the past generation, the percent of people employed has almost doubled. The half-educated workforce has been replaced by one in which the bulk of workers have high school diplomas. It is unlikely that a generation from now most Singaporeans will have PhDs. An investment share of 40% is amazingly high by any standard, and thus a share of 70% would be ridiculous. So one can immediately conclude that Singapore is unlikely to achieve future growth rates comparable to those of the past, as explained by Krugman. But it is only when one actually looks at the quantitative accounting that the astonishing result emerges. All of Singapore's growth can be explained by increases in measured inputs. There is no sign at all of increased efficiency. In this sense, the growth of Singapore is an economic twin of Stalin's Soviet Union growth, because its growth was achieved purely through mobilization of resources. Of course, Singapore is far more prosperous than the USSR ever was, because even at its peak, because Singapore is closer to, though still below, the efficiency was way higher. But compared to Western economies, it's lower. The point, however, is that Singapore's economy has always been relatively efficient. It is just used to be starved of capital and educated workers. Krugman claims that since the Asian growth depends mainly on investment rather than technical progress, it will slow down, because according to the law of diminishing returns, if one accumulates capital relative to labor, one gets lower returns to capital. Hence, the added income from more investment is steadily less. So high rates of investment begin to yield lower income growth. So Krugman claims that there is no miracle in Asia's exceptionally high growth rates, because it is to be explained by high investments. According to Krugman, there is nothing miraculous about Asia's economic growth. He saw surprising similarities between East Asia and the former Soviet Union. Both engaged in an extraordinary mobilization of resources. He also compared the Asian situation to that of the Soviet experience, citing how diminishing returns had already steadily reduced growth rates there too. Moreover, like the Soviet Union, growth in East Asia is likely to diminish due to limits on labor and capital. Krugman states, "It is likely that growth in East Asia will continue to outpace growth in the West for the next decade and beyond, but it will not do so at the pace of recent years. Asia is subject to the law of diminishing returns." Writing in Foreign Affairs, Paul Krugman hypothesized that just like the Soviet Union, which had been going through a period of what economists call diminishing returns to capital accumulation, the Asian tigers were most likely to move in the same direction. He drew a parallel with the Soviet experience and said that the Soviet Union was grinding down because of diminishing returns. And because there was no technical change in Asia as measured by the total factor productivity index, therefore the Asian tigers too were going to be grinding down. The prospect would be that as more and more capital got accumulated, like in the case of the Soviets, it would eventually run into diminishing returns, so that the nice high growth rates would actually start coming down. Back in 1945, Japan was one of the poorest countries on earth. Yet, within a single human lifespan, Japan became an economic superpower, ranking only second behind the United States. But Japan's growth did not resemble that of Singapore. Japan, unlike the other Asian tigers, grew both through high rates of input growth and also through the high rates of efficiency. At the growth rate of 1963 to 74, Japan was set to overtake the United States in real per capita income by 1985, and total Japanese output would exceed that of the United States by 1998, according to projections. However, this did not actually happen due to the Great Japanese Slowdown, also referred to as the last decade. From 1991 to 2003, the Japanese economy, as measured by GDP, grew only 1.14% annually, and the country experienced a stagnant price level. Economist Paul Krugman has argued that the Japan's lost decade is an example of liquidity trap, a situation in which monetary policy is unable to lower nominal interest rates because it is already close to zero. He explained how truly massive the asset bubble was in Japan by 1990, with a tripling of land and stock market prices during the prosperous 1980s. Japan's high personal saving rate, driven in part by the demographics of an aging population, enabled Japanese firms to rely heavily on traditional bank loans from supporting banking networks, as opposed to issuing stock or bonds via the capital markets to acquire funds. The cozy relationship of corporations to banks and the implicit guarantee of a taxpayer bailout of bank deposits created a significant moral hazard problem, leading to an atmosphere of crony capitalism and reduced lending standards. In doing so, they helped inflate the bubble economy to grotesque proportions. Thus, the growth of Japan was slowed down.
My name is Michael Opare, and I'll be presenting the China syndrome. China has seen major economic growth. They learned their lessons from neighbors such as Singapore and Japan, which catapulted them into this limelight. They increased employment and education of the population. They invested massively in physical capital, such as machinery and technology. They also implemented stringent economic policy to curb them to this stage. They sacrificed short-term consumer satisfaction for long-term growth. Some economists and policy holders argue that the boom in China has practical and philosophical reasoning behind it. They argue that practical problem was that China was growing very rapidly and the quality of the numbers was extremely poor in order to look clean. It was stated that Chinese statistics on foreign investment has been overstated by some factors. The philosophical problem remains which year to use as their base year for this economic growth calculation. China, however, invested in local content as well as drastically increasing exports to other nations as well as decreasing imports from these nations. In addition to this, they offered tax and regulatory incentives to foreigners by providing incentives for domestic entrepreneurs to help them invest and indulge in other huge foreign partnerships. They succeeded by partnering major world companies such as Apple Incorporation. Till date, Most of Apple's products are manufactured and assembled in China. However, Huawei, another leading phone manufacturer in China, continues to battle with world-leading phone manufacturers on the world scene. American automobile Buick has over 80% of its market share in Asia. Due to this, it has established a, a manufacturing and an assembly location in China to meet this demand. Due to this development in China, the World Bank estimates that the Chinese economy is currently about 40% as large as that of the United States. Suppose that the United States economy continues to grow at 2.5% each year, and considering China to continue to grow at 10% annually, by the year 2010, its economy will be a third larger than that of the US. The deliberate effort by China to rely excessively on exports made them gain foreign exchange in these foreign countries. This helped them grow their fiscal capital in these countries. China grew its GDP through this period. As of 2019, the GDP per capita of China exceeded $10,000. The mystery that wasn't. Asian countries continue to develop in knowledge building and technology. They continue to invest massively in physical capital such as machinery and infrastructure. Asia continues to soar as one of the leading continents in IT infrastructure. They have built a competitive advantage over most countries in this industry. They have led most inventions in the world through IT and other automobile. Competitive advantage enjoyed by Asian countries open avenues for collaboration and other trade partnerships. Asian countries has seen collaboration with other African countries such as Ghana, Nigeria, and others. They help bring technology to the doorstep of other countries. They make life easier and better. Due to this diffusion of technology, the world's economic center of gravity is considered to be shifting towards Asia. Some economics hold that it is due to the cheap workforce and advanced technology inherent in this region. Most manufacturing companies establish production centers or production plants in this region. The rise of these tigers has, however, seen some other neighboring countries also come into the limelight. Countries such as Turkey continue to enjoy comparative advantage with the production of hardware and houseware designs. Vietnam, on the other hand, continues to be one of the leading footwear producers in the world. Bangladesh, however, produces fabric with high quality textures. Asia continues to deepen its relationship with other countries through international and collaborated import and export trade. They have built a competitive advantage over nations in what it does best by creating specialization in the production process. This makes Asia to enjoy trade surpluses during these international affiliations. Thus, they export more than it imports into its country. The myth of Asia's miracle continues to be a case study and a lesson for major countries during their economic turnovers. Paul Krugman holds that focus on increasing exports accounted for Asia's boom. Also, high economic growth rates than that of the Westerns, that is, Europe and America, factored in to Asia's growth. Rapid industrialization, that is, investing in machinery and technology, helped Asia's boom. Massive education of the population was a major factor for this development. Skilled and cheap labor force, as it describes itself, also made major strides for the Asian region. Asia continues to enjoy market economies. Thus, products being produced in Asia are very low as compared to other countries. Thank you.